Popular podcaster Joe Rogan is signing a $100 million contract to move his successful show to the Spotify platform. And beyond the headlines of this monumental achievement in the podcasting world are also headlines that Joe Rogan has teased he may move from California to Texas. In this video, I'm going to run down the story of what Joe Rogan said, why I think moving to Texas is a bad idea, and what I would do instead. Hey guys, my name is Andrew Henderson. If you're new to our channel, we help and empower successful entrepreneurs and investors to legally reduce their tax bill through legal offshore strategies, to create wealth faster in new boom markets around the world, and to build and to diversify their options personally to have more freedom with things like second passports. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And today I want to talk about Joe Rogan because he is doing something potentially, he's teasing something that I have often said is a bad idea. I'm going to tell you why. But first, let's go over the news story. Comedian and MMA commentator Joe Rogan has suggested he could move from California to Texas, in part due to coronavirus restrictions. Rogan, 52, who spearheads the massively popular Joe Rogan Experience podcast on YouTube, has indicated his operation could soon shift to the Lone Star State for several reasons, including the high cost of living on the West Coast. This came after he spoke to Elon Musk, who was a guest on his show, who teased, that he could move the Tesla production to Texas amid an argument with Alameda County over reopening his Fremont car manufacturing plant. Rogan said, I might move to Texas. If California continues to be this restrictive, I don't know if it is a good place to live. First of all, it's extremely expensive. The taxes are ridiculous, Rogan said. And if they really say we can't do stand-up until 2022 or stuff like that, I might jet. I'm not kidding. This is silly. I don't need to be here. Now, this is in response to what the governor and the politicians, but specifically the governor Gavin Newsom, has been trying to drag out the coronavirus reopening and keep people in their homes longer. I've really been skewering California for a long time. I mean, especially now, if you were forming a meritocracy and you were picking a guy to be your leader, like, picking your team in elementary school, you're on the team. Would anyone pick Gavin Newsom? I mean, is he your guy? And obviously California has some of the highest taxes in the country. Obviously they have some of the most regulations. I have numerous friends I follow on social media who are so happy they moved to Nevada. They're so happy they moved to Texas. And it's like they kiss the ground when they wake up every morning, because what is it about California? Number one, Joe Rogan says taxes are high, cost of living is high, lots of regulations, big nanny state. These are all reasons a lot of people are moving out. But where I think a lot of people get tripped up, right? Joe Rogan, I looked it up. He was born in New York City, New Jersey, basically on the border there. Moved to California. It's certainly the place to be for many people. Certainly Hollywood and all that is right there. But in this era of people being able to work online, companies in the cloud, doing shows remotely, right? If nothing else from this kind of stay-at-home order under the coronavirus, you've seen you can do a podcast, you can do a show. You don't have to necessarily be there with people. And I think Joe Rogan is popular enough, people would even come to him. But with all that being said, if you're from New York or New Jersey and you live in California, Texas or Florida or any of these zero-tax states are not a place that you are from. Maybe you've been there, but I can tell you I've been to over 100 countries. There's a difference living in a place, and there's a difference, going and visiting. Plenty of places I love to visit. I'll spend a week there. I'll spend a month there even. If you made me live there for the next decade, I wouldn't like it. And so people make this mistake in the United States where the taxes are too high in California. Okay, 13.3% I believe is the top state tax bracket. If you're making $100 million, you're paying that for sure. You can go to Texas and pay zero. All right, but you're still paying the federal income tax. You're still paying all the Social Security, which is obviously capped out for now. You're also paying things like Medicare. And, Joe Rogan, I don't know how his company is set up exactly, but you're going to be paying a lot of different taxes, a lot of different costs. even if you live in Texas, even if you live in Florida. So what I would suggest is, if you're going to be moving somewhere that you're not really that familiar with, if you're going to be moving somewhere where you don't have family, or it's not your first choice, right? California is a lot of people's first choice, but it's so dang expensive. And so if you're going to be doing that, why don't you go all the way? Why don't you look at other options that are outside of the normal sphere of influence? It's like that Seinfeld sketch that he did on one of the episodes of the TV show, where he says, the plane is late in departing, but the pilot comes on and says, don't worry, we'll make up the time in the air. And he says, well, if we can make up the time in the air, why don't we just go as fast as possible? And so I say, if you're going to be moving from California to Texas, if you can do that, if your family will go through that, if your wife will accept that, the kids can handle the new schools, all those things that people say, well, you can't move, the kids can't handle the new school, why don't you go where you're absolutely treated best, where you don't just save on state tax, where you don't just save a little bit on the cost of living, but then you move to Austin and it's still not that cheap. Why don't you look at Puerto Rico? Why don't you look at another country? Why don't you look at all of your options in the scheme of the world, where you can totally go where you're treated best, potentially lower your tax rate to 0 or in the single digits or even into the teens, okay? Because if you move from California to Texas, you're going to save a little bit of taxes and a little bit of cost of living. If you move from California to somewhere in Mexico, for example, you could save a lot more money. And there are some pretty nice places in Mexico. One of the things I think a lot of Americans think is, California's the place to be. Best beaches, most beautiful women, best food. None of those things are true. If you get out of the U.S. bubble, there's beaches practically everywhere, all right? Almost every country on earth has beaches, and a lot of them are pretty darn nice. Right? Whether you want dating, you want beaches, you want food, you want culture, you can probably find that somewhere else at a tiny fraction of the price for far less money in taxes. And so if I'm Joe Rogan, I'm going to go overseas and I'm going to set up a production company in one of a couple places. The first option for a U.S. citizen would be move the operation down to Puerto Rico. Now, again, I don't know all the details of the business. I don't know what kind of stuff he's selling, if he's doing merch. Obviously he does stand-up and he's touring, so that's probably a harder one to do tax savings on. But the actual production of this new $100 million show potentially could be moved to Puerto Rico, put a production company there, provide some services for the podcast from Puerto Rico, and live there a good chunk of the year. You have good connectivity to the rest of the U.S., and you can pay as little as 4% tax. Potentially, he could also move to another country if you want to just open up the world. Now, if you're doing stand-up, if you're doing touring, you probably don't want to move to Malaysia, where you're so far away. But plenty of countries in the scope of the Americas, for example, or even Western Europe, where you could live. You could get a tax exclusion for 10 years. You could get a non-dom or a lump sum tax program. If you're making $100 million, you can afford to pay $100,000, $200,000 a year in tax as a lump sum. And just that's your tax burden. Now, for U.S. citizens, you can't just go overseas and pay absolutely zero to the U.S. government, but you can dramatically reduce the amount that you pay if you properly structure your company overseas in another country. And so, being able to pay somewhere between 0 and 10%, something like that, to me would be a great advantage versus paying 37, 40%, even in a zero tax state. You could, even take it one step further, which I imagine, again, if you're doing touring in the United States, you wouldn't do. You could take it one step further and you could actually renounce your citizenship. And you could go and live in a zero tax country or a country with a tax exclusion, a country with a non-dom tax program, all kinds of different options, including in Western Europe and Latin America. You could probably pay pretty darn close to zero. And I would imagine that, Joe Rogan, being as unique and successful as he is, could then go and get some kind of visa, the same visa that the Drakes of the world get, like the O1 exceptional talent visa, to come back and do his performances. And you'll have some tax on the stuff that you're doing in the U.S. physically, but you can move the production of that show overseas. You can take the workers with you. You can dramatically lower your cost of living, more than you would even in Texas. And I think you'd expand your horizons, and possibly, if you're a really successful host of a show, get some kind of guests who maybe don't have access to come to California or who just live somewhere else. Maybe you get some different kind of people to come on the show. I'm not going to tell Joe Rogan how to do a show, but this is what I would do. Anytime I hear people saying I'm going to move to another state, you're only solving a tiny portion of the problem. the federal part is on the tax level is really so much more substantial than the states. Now, what Joe Rogan is also talking about, again, lower cost of living. California is insane. The nanny state is insane. You can get away from those things, and Texas is better. But again, look at all the different rules that still exist on a federal level. There are so many rules. Even if the states allow it, the federal government may not allow it. And so if you went to a country where whatever it is that you value is more accepted, then that's a great way to go, where you're treated best as well. Go where the culture matches what you're looking for. If you're looking for less nanny state, go to a culture where they don't have that. And so, as I often say, if you can move from California to Texas, you can move from California to Puerto Rico. And if you can move from California to Puerto Rico, you can move from California to Panama, you can move to Argentina, you can move to Timbuktu. If you're moving, right? It's already a change. Push it as far as you can. I understand a guy like Joe Rogan's going to have some limits. Perhaps he wants proximity to the country. We've discussed that. But there are plenty of places where you can save substantially a lot more money. What you generally want to do is you want to get this set up before you get the $100 million deal, because you're going to have a bit more involved, a little bit more involvement, getting things structured before you get the deal. But whether it's $100 million or even if you're talking about $10 million, these are millions of dollars in savings over the next couple of years. It's worth considering broadening the horizons. Follow our 5 magic words. Go where you're treated best. Not go where you're treated better, but go where you're treated best. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.